In every century, there comes a moment when the global financial system faces a test it cannot survive. In 1929, that moment came from overconfidence. In 1971, it came from gold. In 2008, it came from greed. And now, as we approach 2026, it's coming from simple mathematics. For the first time in history, the three largest currencies on Earth, the dollar, the yuan, and the euro, are collapsing under the weight of their own contradictions. Each one was built to dominate. Each one promised stability, and each one is now trapped in a death spiral of debt, inflation, and political decay. This isn't the end of one currency. This is the end of the system itself. Let's start with the foundation of global finance, the U.S. dollar. For nearly 80 years, it's been the world's reserve currency, the unit of trade, the measure of value, and the anchor for every economy on Earth. But like all empires, its strength wasn't built on morality or innovation. It was built on control. After World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement made the dollar as good as gold. Other countries pegged their currencies to the dollar, and the dollar was backed by gold at $35 an ounce. But by 1971, America's gold was running out. The U.S. had printed too many dollars and spent too much on wars. So President Nixon did what every empire does before it collapses. He changed the rules. He ended the gold standard and replaced it with trust. From that day forward, the dollar was backed by nothing tangible, just the faith that America would never default. For decades, that illusion worked, but it came with a staggering cost. Infinite money requires infinite debt. Today, America's federal debt has rocketed past $36 trillion, larger than the combined economies of China, Japan, Germany, and India. And the problem isn't just the number, it's the direction. Debt isn't linear, it compounds. When your interest payments grow faster than your tax revenue, you've entered a doom loop. And that's where America is today, trapped between printing more money and causing inflation, or not printing and facing default. The dollar's greatest strength, global demand, is now its greatest weakness. Because the moment the world stops needing dollars, the empire ends. But while the dollar drowns in debt, the yuan is dying of something far older: control. For decades, China's rise was the miracle of the modern world. Hundreds of millions lifted from poverty, cities built overnight, factories producing half the world's goods. But that miracle was built on debt-fueled growth and manipulated stability. Beijing created a system where failure wasn't an option, where the government decided which companies lived, which sectors grew, and which problems to hide. And for a while, it worked. China grew at 10% a year for decades, until the math stopped adding up. By 2025, China's real estate market, once 30% of its GDP, had collapsed under the weight of $13 trillion in local government debt. Entire cities, built on speculation, now sit empty. Developers defaulted. Banks froze lending. Homeowners stopped paying their mortgages. When growth stalled, China turned to its oldest habit: printing money quietly. Not through public bailouts like in the U.S., but through shadow banks and hidden stimulus. The result? A currency that looks strong on paper but is bleeding from the inside. The yuan is not trusted. It's not freely convertible. And global investors know that every number coming from Beijing, GDP, inflation, employment, is filtered through propaganda. That's why, despite China being the world's largest exporter, the yuan still accounts for less than 3% of global currency transactions. No one wants to hold it. You can't lead the world when your own citizens are banned from moving their own money. And then there's the euro, the world's most ambitious monetary experiment. Created in 1999, it was meant to unite Europe under a single currency. But from the start, it was a political dream built on economic lies. While Europe shares a currency, it doesn't share a government, a fiscal policy, or a unified banking system. Germany saves, Italy spends, France regulates, and Greece defaults. When times are good, the differences are invisible. But when a crisis hits, the contradictions explode. In 2008, Southern Europe collapsed under debt, and the European Central Bank printed trillions to save them. In 2020, COVID struck, and Europe printed again. By 2025, inflation hit record highs, energy prices tripled, and public debt soared. Now Europe faces the worst of both worlds: too much debt to raise interest rates and too much inflation to cut them. The result is a currency that's slowly tearing its own union apart. Because the euro only works when everyone agrees, and right now, no one does. Germany wants fiscal discipline, France wants stimulus, Italy just wants to survive, and as the dollar weakens, the euro doesn't rise, it fractures. So here we are, three global currencies, each dying in its own way. The dollar, crushed by debt. The yuan, suffocated by control. The euro, paralyzed by division. Individually, each of these problems could be managed, but together they form the tri-currency trap, because the global economy depends on the balance between them. When the dollar is strong, the world suffers. When the dollar is weak, inflation spreads. When the euro or yuan falter, capital flees back to the dollar, creating artificial strength in a system that's already cracking. This cycle has repeated for decades, but in 2026, the feedback loop breaks. Here's why. In previous crises, when one currency stumbled, another picked up the slack. But in 2026, everyone is weak at once. America's inflation isn't solved. It's just been delayed. China's growth isn't returning. It's evaporating. Europe's unity isn't holding. It's fracturing. When all three pillars wobble together, the entire structure collapses. For decades, critics have predicted the end of the dollar. They've always been early, but this time the shift isn't loud, it's silent. Countries aren't announcing it, they're just doing it. Quietly, in trade deals, in reserve holdings, in energy payments. Saudi Arabia now sells oil to China in yuan. Brazil and India are settling trade in local currencies. The percentage of global reserves held in dollars has dropped from 71% in 1999 to 58% in 2025. That's the lowest level in history, and the decline is accelerating. Why? Because every country watched what happened in 2022 when the U.S. froze Russia's dollar reserves overnight. Trillions, gone with a keystroke. The message was clear: your dollars aren't really yours. The dollar isn't just money, it's a weapon. And nobody wants to be on the wrong end of it. So what happens when the three major currencies can no longer stabilize each other? The answer is a reset, not by choice, but by necessity. The global financial system is like a table with three legs, and all three are cracking. You can patch one, maybe two. But when all three fail, the table doesn't just wobble, it collapses. And this collapse won't look like 1929 or 2008. It won to be a single crash. It will be a sequence of rolling failures, debt defaults, currency devaluations, and capital flight, all feeding into one another across continents. The signs are already here. In America, bond yields are rising faster than GDP growth. In China, local governments can't pay their workers. In Europe, energy shortages are shutting down factories. Each crisis feeds the next, and each central bank's response makes the other's problems worse. When the Fed cuts rates, capital flees other countries. When China devalues its currency, inflation rises in the West. When Europe prints money, investors flee back to the dollar, making U.S. debt even harder to finance. It's a circle of collapse, a global feedback loop with no escape. Thank you so much for watching. This is a complex topic, and we've only scratched the surface. If you found this valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world. Stay curious and stay informed. For nearly 80 years, the answer has been simple. The U.S. dollar. It's been the world's reserve currency, the bedrock of international trade. This unique status allowed America to do things no other country could. Print money almost endlessly, borrow without immediate consequence, and effectively export its inflation to the rest of the world. But this incredible privilege came with a hidden cost, a ticking time bomb. History shows us a pattern. Every empire that held the world's reserve currency, from Spain in the 1600s to Great Britain in the early 1900s, eventually buckled under the weight of its own debt. And now, it seems America is facing its own reckoning. The story begins in 1944 with the Bretton Woods Agreement, which officially crowned the dollar as king. But the real turning point came in 1971. President Nixon severed the dollar's last tie to gold, turning it into a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith. Since that day, the U.S. money supply has exploded by a staggering 60 times. This isn't the free market capitalism we read about in textbooks. It's an economic system running on credit-fueled steroids. But the critical question is, what happens when the world stops believing in the dollar's promise? We're already seeing the signs. Foreign demand for U.S. debt, the very thing that financed America's spending, is evaporating. Back in 2013, foreign central banks were buying up 43% of all new U.S. Treasury bonds. Fast forward to 2024, and that number has plummeted to a mere 8%. China, once a massive holder of U.S. debt, has reduced its holdings to a 14-year low. Japan, the second largest foreign creditor, is now selling off its U.S. bonds to prop up its own currency, the yen. So, who's left to buy all this debt? The Federal Reserve itself. The Fed has become the buyer of last resort, essentially printing new money to loan to its own government. This isn't a healthy, functioning market. It's a closed loop, a form of economic self-cannibalization. As global faith in the dollar wanes, America's primary export is no longer goods or technology, but inflation, and nations around the world are starting to reject it. Look at Saudi Arabia, the historical cornerstone of the petrodollar system that forced the world to buy dollars to buy oil. They've recently started accepting the Chinese yuan for oil sales. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are actively designing a new currency for trade, one backed by tangible commodities, not just promises. The moment that oil, gold, and other vital goods stop being priced and settled in dollars, the dollar's reign doesn't end with a loud crash. It ends with a quiet, deafening silence. Because the day the world no longer needs dollars is the day America's mountain of debt becomes America's problem alone. But the dollar isn't the only major currency in trouble. Let's turn to Europe and the euro. If the dollar's fatal flaw is arrogance, the euro's is fragmentation. When the euro launched in 1999, it was hailed as a visionary project, a single currency that would unite Europe into a financial superpower to rival the United States. Instead, it created a ticking time bomb by yoking vastly different economies together under one monetary policy. You have Germany, the industrial producer, Italy, the perpetual borrower, France, the high-spending state, and Greece, which nearly brought the whole system down. It's one currency, but four completely different economic realities. For years, the European Central Bank, or ECB, has been the glue holding this fragile structure together. Its primary tool? Printing trillions of euros to buy the bonds of weaker southern nations, artificially keeping their borrowing costs low. But there's a fundamental contradiction at play. Every time the ECB prints money to bail out the South, it erodes the confidence and savings of the fiscally prudent North. The fracture lines are now impossible to ignore. Italy's public debt is hovering around 150% of its GDP. France's is closing in on 120%. And Germany, the supposed economic anchor of the entire Union, is facing its own crisis of industrial decline, squeezed by high energy costs and a shifting global trade landscape. When Germany's manufacturing engine sputters, the entire Euro project loses its driving force. Without Germany's productivity to back it up, the ECB's money printing becomes a direct pipeline to inflation, with no real economic growth to show for it. This has put the euro in an impossible trap. If the currency strengthens, the indebted economies of Southern Europe would collapse under the weight of higher borrowing costs. But if the euro weakens, Northern Europe will be ravaged by inflation and watch its capital flee for safer havens. It is a lose-lose scenario. As we look ahead, Europe is facing a perfect storm. A banking sector weighed down by bad loans, a bond market paralyzed by political uncertainty, and a currency caught between implosion and rebellion. This doesn't look like a financial union anymore. It looks like a slow, painful divorce. So if the West is in trouble, what about the East? Many point to China and its currency, the Yuan, as the inevitable alternative. But beneath the polished propaganda of stability lies the largest and most precarious credit bubble in human history. China's total debt-to-GDP ratio has now surged past 320%. To put that in perspective, it's higher than America's current level and even higher than Japan is at the peak of its infamous bubble in 1989. For the last 2 decades, China's economic miracle was fueled by a construction frenzy unlike anything the world has ever seen, building entire ghost cities, empty shopping malls, and massive infrastructure projects that often served no real economic purpose but created the illusion of unstoppable growth. Now, the bill for that illusion is coming due. The collapse of real estate giant Evergrande in 2023 was just the first domino. Country Garden, another massive developer, followed suit in 2024, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Chinese local governments are sitting on over $13 trillion in hidden debt through opaque financing vehicles that nobody can fully account for. Unlike the U.S., China can't simply print its way out of this mess on a global scale because the yuan isn't freely convertible. Their main tool is devaluation, weakening their own currency to try and make their exports cheaper and keep the economic engine from seizing up. But this is a dangerous game. Every time they devalue the yuan, they destroy domestic and international confidence. Every new yuan they print to prop up failing banks encourages capital to flee the country, and every restrictive measure they impose to stop that capital flight just makes investors more desperate to get their money out. China's central bank has already burned through hundreds of billions of its foreign currency reserves just trying to defend the yuan's value. But history teaches a brutal lesson. No country has ever successfully defended its currency while simultaneously battling a property market collapse and a demographic crisis. And that demographic crisis is perhaps China's biggest challenge. The nation is aging faster than any major country in modern history. By 2030, 1 out of every 4 people in China will be over the age of 60. There simply won't be enough young workers to support this aging population and drive the economy forward. There isn't enough growth to pay off the debt, and not enough confidence to save the currency. So while the West is drowning in a sea of debt, the East is drowning in a sea of ghosts. The ghosts of empty apartments, broken projects, and unfulfilled promises. Imagine a perfect storm, not of wind and rain, but of money. 3 massive economic systems. The US dollar, the euro, and the Chinese yuan, all spiraling into crisis at the same time, each one desperately trying to save itself by pushing its problems onto the others. This isn't a Hollywood movie plot, it's the fragile reality of our global economy. Think about it. The US is printing trillions of dollars to manage its staggering debt. Over in Europe, they're printing euros to stop countries from defaulting. And China? They're devaluing the yuan to keep their export machine running. It's a race to the bottom, but here's the catch. They're all tied together. When the U.S. prints dollars, it exports inflation to the rest of the world. When Europe prints euros, it weakens global confidence. When China devalues its currency, it triggers a chain reaction. It's a vicious feedback loop, a domino effect where each falling piece makes the next one wobble even more. This isn't some grand conspiracy theory, it's simple arithmetic. Together, these 3 currencies power over 80% of the global economy. When nobody can trust them, the very concept of money as a reliable store of value starts to crumble. And when people lose faith in money, they don't sit around waiting for instructions. They look for an exit. The financial elites, the ones behind the curtain, they know this better than anyone. Why do you think central banks are buying gold at a record-breaking pace? In 2023 alone, they snapped up over 1,100 tons of it. That's the largest annual purchase in modern history. They're not redecorating their vaults. They're preparing for survival. Gold can't be printed into oblivion. Gold doesn't need a bailout. Gold doesn't default. But for the average person, the story gets even more complicated. The next financial crisis won't just be about numbers on a screen. It will usher in an era of unprecedented control, cleverly disguised as protection. When the system finally breaks, governments will swoop in, not to save you, but to contain you. Get ready to hear a lot about central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. They'll pitch it as a revolutionary upgrade, programmable money that's efficient and secure. They'll say it's for your safety and to stabilize the economy. But what does programmable money really mean? It means money with an expiration date, money that can be restricted, telling you where and how you can spend it. It's the ultimate tool for control. And in the midst of chaos and panic, most people won't resist. They'll be so desperate for order, they'll willingly trade their freedom for a sense of security. The digital dollar, the digital euro, and the digital yuan will promise stability, but at what cost? So, what does the world look like after the Great Financial Reset? History offers some powerful lessons. After the crash of 1929, we got the New Deal, a massive expansion of government power. After the dollar was detached from gold in 1971, the petrodollar system was born, rewriting the rules of global finance. And after the 2008 crisis, we entered the age of quantitative easing, an era fueled by artificial money. Each collapse was followed by a new system, born not from choice, but from necessity. So what comes after this next one? A new financial order where your money isn't just a number in an account, it's a permission slip. Access to your own assets, your identity, and your ability to transact will be granted only to those who play by the new rules. This marks the end of money as a tool of freedom and the beginning of money as a tool of surveillance. But here's the crucial part. Every collapse is also a moment of immense opportunity. Those who understand the patterns of history don't fear the future. They prepare for it. In the 1920s, the people who moved their assets to cash before the market crashed became the new wealthy class of the 1930s. In 2008, those who held real assets like gold and maintained liquidity weathered the storm while others were wiped out. Survival in the coming years won't be about predicting the exact date of the collapse. It will be about understanding the repeating patterns of history. And right now, that pattern is unfolding before our very eyes. As the dollar shows signs of weakness, as the yuan faces internal cracks, and as the euro struggles to hold together, remember this one timeless truth. No currency, no empire is permanent. They rise on a foundation of confidence, and they fall the moment that confidence is lost. This isn't about the end of the world. It's about the end of a cycle. The end of a global system built on a mountain of debt and illusion. We are on the verge of something we have not witnessed in a century. A world being forced to rediscover what real, tangible value truly means. Because when all the paper promises and digital entries go up in smoke, the only thing left standing will be truth. Thank you for watching. If this conversation resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. We need to keep this dialogue going. Stay informed, stay prepared, and we'll see you in the next video.